The Australian Financial Review.
Under a big blue sky on the outskirts of Mildura, the idea that has obsessed John Lasich for 47 years is taking shape. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. 1,200 enormous mirrors are arranged in rows, as if they're seats in a Greek amphitheatre. Each mirror has been positioned to reflect sunlight onto some super strength solar panels, which John's company Raygen have hung 50 metres above the ground. We've been driving outside Mildura for about 25 minutes and we've pulled up at a place where we can see some big light towers, almost as if there's a game of night football going on. But it's the middle of the day, beautiful blue sky day, which leads me to think that we have finally found Raygen right up here in the Murray region of Victoria. And John Lasich, is that you?
Peter, yes indeed. Pleasure to see you here.
We've got giant towers, we've got lights up there, we've got seemingly panels or mirrors, or what on earth are you doing here?
Yeah, so this is the next generation of solar power system, right? Unlike any other PV system, which just produces power when the sun's shining, this one can produce power at any time, 24 hours a day.
When I was a kid, I can remember lying on the back lawn with a magnifying glass and, tilting the magnifying glass to get the sun's rays behind it and, trying to burn a leaf. Is it kind of a similar concept?
Yes, so it's the industrial version of that times a million.
Those mirrors can collectively produce a beam of reflected light that is strong enough to melt steel. Armed with that intense stream of concentrated sunlight and a solar cell that's almost twice as powerful as a standard PV, John's company Raygen could settle for being just another solar power generator. But these days, pumping solar power into the grid at midday, that's a bit like selling coal to Newcastle.
What we've got at the moment is we've got the grid saturated and we've got instabilities occurring. So storage is the enabler. I started this company to develop the next generation of solar technology that we can have 24 hours a day.
John's plan to sell solar power at night time has caught the attention of some of the world's biggest energy multinationals. They've pumped money into Raygen in the belief that John might have finally cracked the code after almost 5 decades of work.
Hi, my name is John Lasich. I'm the founder of Raygen Resources. We're trying to come from 100 years and $1 trillion behind the incumbents, and we're trying to beat them at their own game. It's a tough gig.
Everyone knows we need to do something about climate change, but what's not clear is how do we fix it?
Low emissions technologies.
There is net zero modelling.
Change is coming whether you like it or not.
Change isn't just coming, it's already underway. We're living through a massive industrial revolution where just about everything we do is going to have to change in less than 3 decades. Empires are going to crumble and fortunes are going to be made. I'm Peter Kerr from the Carbon Challenge team at the Australian Financial Review, and this is Tech Zero. It's a podcast about the big green ideas that could get us to net zero and the inspiring people who are putting their heart and soul into making them work. Anyone who visited John Lasich's backyard in the late 1970s and early 1980s had to watch their step. He had an uncle who'd worked on Sydney's Lucas Heights nuclear reactor and who had advised John to focus his university studies on solar power rather than follow him into nuclear power. John took the advice and started experimenting in his backyard in the Melbourne suburb of Prahran.
I bought a solar cell. I managed to get a solar cell, and you can imagine how rare it was then, 76. It was about 2 centimetres square, and I was very excited about this because, what a beautiful thing. You just shine light on it, it makes power, there's no noise, it never wears out. But I was incredibly underwhelmed when I took this cell and put it in light, and it produced milliwatts, right? Not even watts, milliwatts.
Unimpressed by the paltry amount of energy generated by the solar cells of that era, John set about trying to concentrate the sun's rays to generate more power.
I made a little concentrator which was made out of the bladder from a wine cast. So I got a couple of my mates at uni to help me drink a flagon of wine, right, for a good cause, laid that over it and then put some fiberglass on that. And then I took that small dish, which was about 300 millimetres in diameter, with the cell, put those two together and focused up the light and produced over 100 times more power than I'd got before. And I thought, well, hello, we're onto something here. And about 10 seconds later, the cell fell apart because it had overheated. So I've really spent the last 20 or 30 years trying to deal with that problem. And then I built probably 5 or 6 different versions in the backyard over the next 5 to 10 years that I actually got working. So, and I scaled them up by a factor of 10 or 20. That used to be highly amusing to the friends that would come around, and they'd see this device in the backyard which would track the sun, make power. We'd hook up the little 12-volt television to that and watch the footy on it. Right? So we had solar football way back then, which was a bit of fun.
As he souped up these homemade concentration systems, there was the odd mishap. One time the blinds covering a window got burnt because John accidentally left his concentration system on the front porch one afternoon.
I left the dish sitting there fixed, and what had happened is the sun had come out later on and moved across the sky, and a beam had burnt the blind, burnt a trace across the line, and I'm thinking, this stuff is powerful.
It was a near miss. If that reflected beam had been a few centimetres to the left, it would have burned through the wooden walls on his house.
It's also dangerous if you don't control it very well. When I was producing hydrogen at one stage, also in the backyard, with my wife helping me do that, we had a zirconia electrolysis cell in there, and I managed to melt that as well. And zirconia melts, I think, at 2,200 degrees. So it gives you an idea of the incredible power of the sun and what you can do with it if you can harness it.
Sometimes as kids we like to put our finger through the flame on a candle and be amazed at how brave we are. If I were to put my hand across this beam that melted zirconium or copper, does it literally slice my hand like a laser?
No, you'd be fine as long as you moved it fairly quickly. If you left it there for 5 seconds, it would drill a hole in your hand.
Your backyard's a dangerous place. I'm wearing a hard hat if I ever get invited around for a barbecue.
A hard hat won't do it.
If you're working with a super strength beam of light, you need a super strength solar panel that can cope with the intensity. Raygen manufacture their own patented solar panels at Nunawading in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. They call them PV Ultra, and they convert about 38% of received sunlight into power. And that's quite a bit better than the standard solar panels you see on people's roofs in the suburbs. Those standard panels convert about 20% of received sunlight into power.
We use satellite-grade solar cells that are extremely efficient. So they're about twice the efficiency of your normal solar panel.
Now, we don't want to get too bogged down in the technical reasons why John's panels can convert 38% of received sunlight into power compared to the 20% that normal panels get. But in a nutshell, it comes down to the number of positive and negative junctions that you build into your panel. The mainstream panels on your roof, they're single junction panels. John's panels are multi-junction. It's a bit like powering a device with one battery compared to 2 or 3 batteries. On the day we caught up with John in Mildura, he pulled one of his PV Ultra solar cells out of his pocket. It was a square, 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres, and about 1 centimetre deep.
So we've just made a couple of thousand of these. Right now, you've got to remember that one of these is the equivalent of about 40 normal panels.
It's not bad for something you can slide into your pocket, is it? At the 30-hectare site that Raygen has on the outskirts of Mildura, there are 4 towers, and each of them are 50 metres tall. Each tower holds 440 of John's super strength solar cells. And that's what the mirrors are reflecting the light onto. It makes me wonder, why don't we put these all over our roofs?
Very good question. These cells are very expensive. The thing that we've been able to do is work out a way to use these cells. So these cells, yes, they're double the efficiency, and they can take 1,000 times the intensity of light and therefore produce a couple of thousand times more power per unit area. They cost 100 times more per unit area, right? So what we've been able to do is, yes, they cost 100 times more. We get a couple of thousand times more energy out of it. So that's the leverage that we get. We pay more, we get vastly more than that.
Super strength solar cells aren't worth much if you can't get your power into the transmission line that carries the power to the customer. And that's been a very real problem for the large number of renewable energy producers who've popped up in the past decade in the West Murray region. That's an area that roughly stretches from Ballarat and Beechworth in the south and east to Mildura and Broken Hill in the west and north.
This region is called the rhombus of regret as it comes to solar. It's a really unfortunate title. But fundamentally, all these solar farms built at exactly the same time congested the grid, and then the returns got dramatically hit.
That voice you just heard, that's Will Mosley. As Raygen's Chief Commercial Officer, his job is to take John's technical wizardry and make money out of it.
So initially Mildura was at the edge of the grid, and so there was a lot of value in building solar here. And so the grid said, this is great because you're reducing the amount of power we need to put from Melbourne to Mildura. But then suddenly that equation shifted, and we needed to send power from Mildura back to Melbourne. And that was fine at first, but it's not a very big transmission line. And what happened is, as you kept building more and more solar, that midday transmission line got more and more congested to the point where the grid said, we can no longer accept power during these periods, or we've reached our limit. So these projects are typically levered with 80% debt and 20% equity, and the change in the grid meant that they could only get valued at about 70% of the power they were exporting. So they lost 30% of the value because of this congestion. And that realistically meant a lot of solar developers and a lot of these solar farms had to be pretty heavily restructured because of this big issue with grid congestion. So it's really hurting returns in the solar industry and has really slowed down the amount of solar being deployed.
If Raygen's going to be a financial success, they need to find a way to pump Mildura sunshine into the power line after dark. That's when neighbouring solar farms have stopped generating and when demand for power is rising as lights and televisions switch on across the Australian suburbs. John's team reckon they've got a solution, and it's much cheaper than installing a big battery. We'll tell you more about it after the break. There's another difference about John's solar cells that I haven't told you about yet. The mainstream solar panels you see on rooftops in the suburbs are one-trick ponies. They convert sunlight into electricity, and that's great. But the solar cells that Raygen manufacture in Nunawading are two-trick ponies. They convert sunlight into electricity like normal panels, but they also capture the heat of the sun. And given those mirrors are reflecting a beam of light that could be more than 1,000 degrees Celsius, heat is a big opportunity for Raygen.
PV panels take in 100% of the light, they turn 20% into electricity, and they throw away the other 80% that is being caught. The panel heats up, and then it re-radiates and loses that heat. In our case, with the platform that we've developed, we can capture that heat, and then we can do something else useful with that. We've gone to all the trouble of capturing it, concentrating it, and we've got it. So don't waste it.
On the back of the solar cell that John pulled out of his pocket, there were two holes through which water can be piped. Cold water enters through one of those piped holes, and it's quickly warmed up by the intense heat that's hitting the surface of the cell. Now that it's hot, the water can exit through the other hole on the back of the cell. It's then stored in a dam only 50 metres away, which basically serves as a big industrial thermos full of hot water.
We get two grabs at it, so we get the electrical bit and we get the thermal bit. And what we've done then is developed a storage system that sits around that. It uses that heat.
So we're walking up this little ramp and there's tarpaulin over something. What have we got here, John?
We're standing by now is the hot pit. So this is 17,000 cubic metres of water that's going to be heated up in the process of being heated up as the hot store.
So this water will come through the back, effectively, of your photovoltaic panels, collect the heat of the sun.
Correct.
And then come here, and this is like the big thermos, I guess.
The big thermos. So this collects all the byproduct energy, and this is stored here until we need to use it in the turbine.
How long can this big dam, this big industrial thermos, keep the water warm before it just gradually goes cold?
Yeah, this can keep the water hot for months.
Really?
So this style of water storage, of energy storage, has been used in parts of Northern Europe, like Denmark, for district heating, right, which is a seasonal thing. So what they do is heat it up in the summer and store that heat all the way through to the winter. So in that case, they're storing it for 6 months. In our case, usually a week or two is actually enough, right? But this type of technology can easily store that energy for a long time with very, very little loss.
So if I came up here in the middle of winter and dived in for a swim, what sort of temperature are we talking about?
Well, it would be 90 degrees.
Right. Okay.
Right. So you could make tea out of it, right?
Okay. Not advisable then.
Not advisable.
Once you've got hot water, it's fairly easy to make power at any time of day. Most of our traditional power stations in Australia burn fossil fuels to boil water, turn it into steam, and as that steam rises, it spins a turbine. You've got power. Now, the water in Raygen's dam at Mildura will be just below boiling point. So they're going to use that hot water to boil ammonia because it's got a lower boiling point than water.
To make steam, generally you've got to have more than 100 degrees centigrade, and if it's high pressure, it has to be 150 all the way up to 500 degrees.
Yeah. Yep.
Here, with ammonia, we can boil ammonia at 90
right.
Easily. Right, so the turbine doesn't really know the difference. It's got a working fluid going through it. Just all of the temperatures are lower.
The ammonia is kept in a closed loop. After it's boiled into a vapour, Raygen's going to use cold water to convert it back to a liquid. And that means the same ammonia can be used again and again. And in case you're wondering, ammonia does not contain carbon. It's just a compound of nitrogen and hydrogen. For you, John, you started tinkering with the idea of concentrating the sun's rays in your backyard when you were 18. You're now in your 60s, won't give away your exact age, or maybe I will, mid-60s. And here we are on this giant site, thousands of mirrors. Can you believe that your sort of backyard tinkering all these decades later has led to this?
Oh yes, I can now. I can see it. So yes, it's a dream come true. This is pretty much how I imagined it, and it's magnificent to be able to stand here today and actually see it in action, working, and putting power into the grid, and getting ready to store that power as well.
When we started walking around the Mildura site, I noticed that John had left the boot of his car open. And I was getting a bit worried that he might end up with a flat battery far from roadside support. But my producer Lap put me at ease. He had noticed that while we were getting ready, John had rigged up a solar panel to the battery of his car. It was sitting there charging while we were walking around the site recording this audio. Later on, John's colleagues told us that this was a pretty normal occurrence. That's just the kind of guy he is.
To go up to the other end and walk back, there's a pretty good view.
Great. No 47-year journey is without setbacks. And Raygen's not the first company to cover this site outside Mildura with mirrors with a view to concentrating sunlight. A company called Solar Systems tried to do something very similar between 2006 and 2009. John was actually the chief technical officer of Solar Systems. And while his technology worked okay, the global financial crisis struck just as Solar Systems was trying to raise the last bit of money they needed to get into production. The company collapsed and went into administration in 2009. They were bought out of administration by Silex, and Silex tried to push on and complete the Mildura project. But by 2014, they had suspended work on it, blaming the uncertainty that Tony Abbott's government had created around the renewable energy target as one of the major reasons.
Today is a dark day indeed for the solar industry in Australia.
The suspension meant that $110 million of proposed funding from state and federal governments was withdrawn.
18,000 solar workers go to bed tonight not knowing if they have a job at Christmas time.
John left Solar Systems before Silex bought it, and he started from scratch with Raygen in 2010. One of Raygen's shareholders bought the Mildura site and has leased it back to Raygen ever since.
We took everything we knew from that and then basically started with a clean sheet and said, okay, we know all this stuff. These are the goods, these are the bads. What do we want over here? And you fill the gaps with what you've got, and then you work out what do you need to do. So that's really what we've been doing for the last 12 years, which is culminating in the demonstration that we're doing now. Sometimes you might think it was an unhealthy obsession, right? But it's an obsession that I couldn't do without. It's borne incredible fruit along the way, and we've made some great achievements. But it's not easy. There's a lot of times when you're in lean times and you have to just keep on plugging. You have to have an idea that is real, but persistence is the thing that really works. So, we keep that persistence meter going. And what happens is when the mood, when the money and all that is not there, if you persist, when it reappears, magically you'll be there and you'll look like an overnight success. Oh, these guys were smart. In fact, you've been plugging away in the back room for 20 years to do this.
There's lots of differences between Solar Systems and Raygen, but one of the big ones is the fact that private money is now flowing for concentrated solar. Solar Systems had largely run on state and federal government money and loans from the directors. The only significant corporate money involved was from the company that's now known as Energy Australia. But more than a decade on, Raygen's share register includes some big players in the global energy game. The list includes one of Australia's biggest power generators, AGL Energy, and the Dutch solar power company Photon Energy. The world's biggest oil field services company Schlumberger is on board, and so is Norway's huge state-owned oil company Equinor. They used to be called Statoil. The biggest of them all is the American oil giant Chevron. They've got a market cap above $300 billion US. So they're a powerful friend to have in your corner.
Those guys clearly recognise that we need to change the way we do energy and have got on board with the type of thing we do.
AGL reckons the Mildura project should be repeatable, and they hope to build a similar model at Liddell in New South Wales, where AGL's coal-fired power station is due to close within the next couple of years.
We've had the confluence of the market need, our own level of maturity, and the interest of these parties in what we're doing all come together at the same time. And, if we get this right, I could be classed as a genius entrepreneur, right? Otherwise, I'll still be a mad scientist,
You've always got your backyard.
That's right. So it's what we've targeted for many years, and it looks like all the pieces are coming together. It's extremely exciting.
Thanks for listening to Tech Zero. Join us next week when we talk to the Australian scientists who are capturing Elon Musk's attention with their plan to suck carbon straight out of the air. If you like the show and you'd like to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And consider giving us a review or a rating, as it helps others to find us. This podcast was hosted and written by me, Peter Kerr, produced and edited by Lap Fan, technical production by Cormac Lally and Rob Fletcher. This podcast was executively produced by Fiona Buffini. At the Australian Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. You can subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. If you want to get in touch with us at Tech Zero, you can email us at techzero@afr.com. Tech Zero is part of the Financial Review's Carbon Challenge franchise.
The Australian Financial Review.